Listen, I want to tell you something. What you're about to hear will make you stop whatever you are doing, because this is the kind of story people don't forget, the kind that starts soft and then hits hard. Before we continue, please hit the subscribe button, like and comment where you are watching this story from. It will be of help to grow. Let's continue. And it all began on a day when everything was normal until one small thing changed, and nothing was normal again. I'm standing in my kitchen doorway at 6 a.m, coffee pot in one hand, and I cannot move. I physically cannot move my feet, because there's a woman I've never seen before sitting at my kitchen table wearing my favorite flannel shirt and nothing else that I can see, and she's drinking orange juice straight from the carton like she owns the place. And the worst part? My daughter Emma is sitting right across from her, eating cereal, chatting away like this is completely normal. "Dad!" Emma looks up, milk dripping from her spoon. "You're finally awake." The woman turns to look at me, and I swear to God, time stops. She's got these sharp green eyes, the kind that look like they can see right through all your excuses, and her dark hair is messy in a way that makes my brain go completely blank. She sets down my orange juice carton and gives me this tiny smile that doesn't reach her eyes. "Good morning," she says, and her voice is cool, controlled, like we're in a business meeting, and not my kitchen where she's wearing my shirt. "We need to talk." My mouth opens, nothing comes out. I'm Jake Morrison, 34 years old. I've ridden motorcycles across half the country. I've raised a daughter on my own since she was 2. I've faced down angry customers at the auto shop, and right now I'm completely frozen like a deer in headlights. "Who?" I finally managed to croak out. "Who are you?" Emma giggles. Actually giggles. "Dad, don't you remember last night?" And that's when pure ice-cold panic floods through my entire body. Because honestly, I don't. I don't remember last night. Well, I remember some of it, but it's all fuzzy around the edges, and there are definitely some blank spots. And oh God, what did I do? Let me back up. Let me tell you how I even got here, to this impossible moment. Because trust me, this isn't the kind of thing that just happens to guys like me. 3 weeks ago, my life was simple. Too simple, maybe. I wake up at 5:30 every morning. I make breakfast for Emma. She's 7 now, and she's the entire reason I get up every day. I drop her at school. I go to Morrison's Auto Repair. That's the shop I inherited from my old man before he passed. And I work on cars until it's time to pick her up. We have dinner, usually something simple because I'm not winning any cooking awards. We watch a little TV. I help with homework. I read her a story, and she goes to bed. Then I sit on my front porch, sometimes with a beer, usually alone, and I try not to think too hard about how this is it. This is my whole life. And I'm okay with that, because Emma deserves stable and safe. Her mum left when Emma was 2. Just left. Didn't want the responsibility, didn't want the small town life, didn't want any of it. Melissa walked out that door, and I haven't heard from her since, except for the divorce papers her lawyer sent. So, yeah, it's been just me and Emma for 5 years now, and we've got our routine down. But 3 weeks ago, something changed. I was at the shop, underneath a Ford F-150, covered in grease, when I heard heels clicking on the concrete floor. Actual heels. Nobody wears heels to an auto shop in Riverside, Montana. Population 3,000 on a good day. We're a town where people wear boots, sneakers, or those weird toe shoes that nobody admits they own but somehow everyone has. "Excuse me," a woman's voice called out. "Professional, clipped, not from around here. Is anyone available?" I rolled out from under the truck, and I had to actually shield my eyes because the sun was coming through the bay door behind her, and all I could see was this silhouette of a woman in what looked like a business suit in my shop in Riverside. Yeah, I said, standing up and wiping my hands on a rag that was already too dirty to help. What can I do for you? She stepped forward, out of the sunlight, and I got my first real look at her. Professional didn't even cover it. She looked like she'd stepped out of one of those magazines Emma sometimes looks at when we're waiting at the doctor's office. Perfectly styled dark hair, a grey suit that probably cost more than I make in a month, and she was holding a leather folder like it contained the secrets of the universe. My car broke down about 2 miles from here, she said, getting straight to business. A black Mercedes S-Class. I need it towed and repaired as quickly as possible. I'm willing to pay extra for expedited service. I couldn't help it. I actually laughed. Not in a mean way, just in a "this is so out of place" way. Her eyes narrowed. Is something amusing? No, sorry, I said, clearing my throat. It's just, we don't get a lot of Mercedes around here, and definitely not S-Class. This is more of a Ford and Chevy territory. Can you fix it or not? She asked. And there was this edge to her voice that told me she was used to getting what she wanted, when she wanted it. Depends what's wrong with it, I said. Let me get my truck and we'll go take a look. If you're watching this and you've ever had one of those moments where you know something is about to change your life, but you don't know how yet, hit that like button because you know exactly what I'm talking about. And stick around because this story gets way more complicated than a broken down Mercedes. So I drove her out to where her car had died, this sleek black monster sitting on the side of Route 12 like a spaceship that had crash-landed in the wrong decade. I popped the hood, poked around, and diagnosed the problem pretty quick. Alternator was shot, and she'd run the battery down trying to keep going. I can fix it, I told her, but I'll need to order the part. Might take a few days. Her face went tight. Days? I don't have days. I have meetings in Seattle tomorrow. Well, you could rent a car in Billings. That's about 90 miles east. Or you could wait, I said with a shrug. Those are pretty much your options. She closed her eyes and took this deep breath, like she was counting to 10 in her head. Fine. Is there a hotel nearby? I actually laughed again. Couldn't help it. There's the Riverside Inn. It's clean. Mrs. Patterson runs it. She makes a good breakfast. The look she gave me could have frozen fire, but she pulled out her phone, made a call, and arranged to stay. I towed her car back to the shop, and I figured that would be the last I'd really see of her, except when she came to pick up the car. I was wrong. She showed up at the shop the next day, this time in jeans and a sweater, which somehow made her look even more out of place, because the jeans were the kind that are perfectly pressed, and the sweater probably came from some store that doesn't even put prices on things. I need something to do, she announced. I'm going insane at that inn. I said, because what do you even say to that? Okay? Can I help here? She asked. I'll work for free. I just need to be doing something. I looked at her manicured nails, her expensive clothes, her entire energy that screamed corner office and assistants and probably a driver. You want to work in an auto shop, I said slowly. Yes. Have you ever changed oil? No. Rotated tires? No. Fixed anything with an engine? No. But I'm a fast learner, she said. And there was something in her eyes, something almost desperate, that made me say yes when I should have said no. And that's how Victoria Chen, CEO of Chen Industries, one of the biggest tech manufacturing companies on the West Coast, ended up working in my auto shop in Riverside, Montana. I didn't know she was a CEO then. She introduced herself as Victoria, and she jumped in like she had something to prove. She wasn't good at it, not at first. She got grease everywhere. She mixed up tools. She once tried to use a torque wrench like a hammer, and I had to physically stop her before she hurt herself. But she tried. God, she tried so hard. And somewhere between teaching her how to change brake pads and watching her face light up when an engine she'd helped tune actually started, something shifted. We started talking, real talking. She told me about growing up in San Francisco, about her parents who'd immigrated from Taiwan with nothing and built a small electronics business from the ground up, about how she'd inherited it when they passed and grown it into an empire, about how she worked 90-hour weeks and couldn't remember the last time she'd done something just because she wanted to. I told her about Emma, about raising her alone, about how scared I was every single day that I was messing her up, that I wasn't enough. "You're enough," Victoria said one evening when we were sitting on the hood of her Mercedes, waiting for paint to dry on another car. "I can tell, the way you talk about her, that's love, real love." And then she looked at me, and I looked at her, and something passed between us that I hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. That was 2 weeks ago. Now here's where things get complicated, and this is where I need you to really pay attention, because this is the part that led to this morning, to her in my kitchen in my shirt. Last night was supposed to be simple. Victoria's car was finally fixed. She was leaving today, heading back to Seattle, back to her real life. We'd exchanged numbers, made vague promises to keep in touch. But we both knew what this was, a moment out of time, nothing more. But then she showed up at my house at 8 p.m. with a bottle of wine and said, "I don't want to leave without saying a real goodbye." Emma was already asleep. I invited Victoria in. We sat on my porch, we drank the wine, we talked about everything and nothing. She told me she'd never felt as free as she had these past 3 weeks. I told her I'd never met anyone who challenged me the way she did. And then, and this is the part that's fuzzy, then things get weird in my memory. I remember feeling dizzy. I remember Victoria helping me inside. I remember her saying something about the wine tasting strange. I remember her voice getting urgent, scared even. And then nothing, just blank, empty nothing until I woke up this morning, in my bed, fully clothed, thankfully, but with no memory of how I got there. And now she's in my kitchen, in my shirt, and my daughter is eating cereal like this is fine, and Victoria just said, "We need to talk." I set down the coffee pot very carefully because my hands are shaking. "Emma, honey," I say, and my voice sounds strange even to me. "Can you go brush your teeth and get ready for school?" "But Dad..." "It's Saturday," Emma says. "Right, Saturday. My brain is not working. Then go watch cartoons for a bit, okay? I need to talk to Miss Victoria." Emma shrugs, grabs her cereal bowl, and skips out of the kitchen. The second she's gone, I turn to Victoria. "What happened last night?" I ask, and I don't even recognize my own voice. "Why are you here? Why are you wearing my shirt? Why can't I remember anything?" Victoria stands up slowly. She's taller than I remembered, or maybe I just feel smaller right now. She looks me dead in the eyes, and what she says next makes the entire floor drop out from under me. "Someone drugged us last night, Jake," she says quietly. "Both of us. And I think I know who did it and why. But if I'm right, we're both in serious danger, and so is Emma." My blood turns to ice. "What are you talking about?" I whisper. She reaches into the pocket of my shirt, pulls out a small plastic bag with white residue in it, and sets it on the table between us. "I woke up around 3 a.m., she says. "You were unconscious but breathing. I found this in your wine glass. It's Rohypnol, Jake. Someone roofied our drinks, and I think they were planning to make it look like something happened between us, something that would destroy both our lives. But the question is..." She's cut off by a loud knock on my front door, 3 sharp raps that make us both jump. Victoria's face goes pale. "Don't answer it," she whispers. But I'm already moving toward the door because through the window I can see a police car parked in my driveway. And that's when I realize this nightmare is just beginning. My hand is on the doorknob and I can feel my pulse in my throat. Through the frosted glass panel, I can see two shapes. Two officers. In Riverside, we've got maybe 4 cops total, and I know every single one of them. I've fixed their personal vehicles. I've had beers with them at Murphy's Bar. I coached softball with Deputy Harris 2 summers ago. So why does opening this door feel like the worst idea of my life? Victoria appears beside me so quietly I actually flinch. She's pulled on her jeans from last night, but she's still wearing my flannel shirt, and her hair is still messy. And if these cops see her like this in my house at 6:30 in the morning, the whole town will know about it by noon. In a place like Riverside, reputation is everything. It's the difference between people trusting you with their cars, their kids, their lives, and being the guy everyone whispers about. "Jake," Victoria breathes, and her hand closes around my wrist. Her fingers are ice cold. "Please, just wait." But the knock comes again. Louder this time, more insistent. "Jake Morrison, this is Sheriff Daniels. I need to speak with you." Sheriff Daniels. Not one of the deputies, the actual sheriff. Tom Daniels has been sheriff of Riverside County for 15 years. He's the one who came to my house the night my dad died, who sat with me on that same porch while I tried to figure out how to tell 8-year-old Emma that Grandpa wasn't coming back. He's the one who checked in on us every week that first year, who made sure we were eating, who showed up with a truck full of firewood that first winter. Tom Daniels wouldn't be at my door at 6:30 on a Saturday morning unless something was seriously wrong. I open the door. Sheriff Daniels stands there in his uniform, his hat in his hands, and the expression on his weathered face makes my stomach drop. Behind him is Deputy Chen, no relation to Victoria, a younger guy who transferred here from Billings last year. Deputy Chen's hand is resting on his belt, near his gun, and that detail sends alarm bells screaming through my head. "Tom," I say, and I'm trying to sound normal, casual, like I don't have a half-dressed CEO hiding behind my door. "What's going on? Is everything okay?" "That's what I'm here to find out, Jake," Tom says, and his voice is kind but firm. "We got a call about an hour ago. Anonymous tip. Someone said they saw a woman being brought into your house last night, appeared to be unconscious or impaired, and they were concerned for her safety." The world tilts sideways. "What?" "I managed to get out." No, that's not what happened. I mean, yes, someone was here last night, but it wasn't like that. It wasn't." "Jake," Tom holds up his hand, "I need you to calm down. I'm not here to accuse you of anything. I'm here to do my job. The caller said they saw you carrying a woman into your house around 9 p.m. last night, and that she didn't look like she could walk on her own. Is there a woman here now?" My mind is racing so fast I can barely think straight. Someone saw us last night. Someone was watching my house, and they called the cops and said, "I what? Kidnapped someone? Assaulted someone?" Sheriff Daniels. Victoria's voice cuts through the chaos, and she steps into view. She's pulled herself together somehow, stands up straight, and even in borrowed clothes, she radiates this authority that makes both officers actually take a step back. "My name is Victoria Chen. I'm here of my own free will. There's been a misunderstanding." Tom's eyes go wide. He looks at Victoria, then at me, then back at Victoria. I can literally see him trying to piece this together, trying to figure out why this polished, obviously wealthy woman is at my house, wearing my clothes at 6:30 in the morning. "Ma'am," Tom says carefully, "were you impaired last night?" "Yes," Victoria says, "and I want to grab her and stop her from talking because admitting that seems like a terrible idea, but she keeps going. But not in the way your anonymous caller implied. Someone drugged both of us. We were both victims last night, Sheriff. And I believe whoever called you is the same person who drugged us. Deputy Chen's hand moves closer to his gun. Ma'am, that's a serious allegation. It's the truth, Victoria says firmly. I found residue of what I believe to be rohypnol in one of the wine glasses. I've preserved it as evidence. Someone wanted to incapacitate us, and then called you to make it look like Jake had done something wrong. This was planned, Sheriff. This was deliberate. Tom studies her face for a long moment. I've known him long enough to recognize when he's in full cop mode, analyzing every word, every movement, looking for the truth underneath it all. I'm going to need to see that evidence, he says finally. And I'm going to need both of you to come down to the station and give formal statements. Absolutely, Victoria agrees. But I need to make something clear first. I'm the CEO of Chen Industries. I have lawyers on retainer, and if this incident becomes public before we understand what really happened and who was behind it, it could damage both my company and Jake's reputation. I'm asking you to handle this with discretion. I watch Tom's face carefully. I can see the moment he recognizes the name Chen Industries. See the flicker of surprise, then the calculation. He's a small-town sheriff, but he's not stupid. He knows that having a major CEO involved in an incident in his town could go very badly in a lot of different ways. Discretion I can promise, Tom says. But I can't ignore a potential crime, Miss Chen. If what you're saying is true, someone committed assault and filing a false police report. Those are serious charges. I understand, Victoria says. And I want them caught just as much as you do. Dad? Emma's small voice comes from the hallway, and my heart just about breaks because she sounds scared. Dad, what's happening? Why are the police here? I turn to see my daughter standing there in her pajamas with the unicorns on them, holding her stuffed rabbit that she's had since she was 3, and her eyes are huge and frightened. This is exactly what I never wanted for her. Drama, fear, police at our door. It's okay, sweetheart, I say, kneeling down to her level. Sheriff Daniels just needs to talk to me about some grown-up stuff. Everything's fine. But why is Miss Victoria still here? Emma asks, looking between all of us. Did she have a sleepover? If the situation weren't so tense, I might actually laugh at the innocence of that question. Victoria must have the same thought, because I see her lips twitch slightly. Something like that, honey, I tell Emma. Listen, I need you to do me a favor. I need you to go to Riley's house for a little bit, okay? Just for a few hours. Riley is Emma's best friend, who lives 3 houses down. Her mum, Sarah, is one of the few people in this town I actually trust completely. She's a single mum too, works as a nurse at the county hospital, and she's helped me out more times than I can count. I don't want to, Emma says, and her bottom lip is trembling now. I want to stay with you. I know, baby, I know, I say, pulling her into a hug. But I promise I'll come get you really soon, okay? And maybe we can get ice cream later. Extra sprinkles? She asks into my shoulder. Extra sprinkles. I promise, even though my heart is breaking because I'm bribing my 7-year-old to leave so I can go talk to the police about being drugged. Tom clears his throat. Jake, why don't you call Sarah? And we'll wait while you get Emma settled. Then we'll all head to the station and sort this out. 20 minutes later, Emma is safely at Riley's house. Sarah is looking at me with concern and 1,000 questions in her eyes that I promise to answer later. And I'm sitting in the back of Tom's patrol car with Victoria. Deputy Chen is driving, Tom is in the passenger seat, and the whole thing feels surreal. Victoria's hand finds mine between us, hidden from view. Her fingers lace through mine and squeeze once. I squeeze back. Whatever's happening, whatever mess we're in, at least we're in it together. The Riverside County Sheriff's Office is a small brick building on Main Street, right between the library and the hardware store. I've been inside exactly 3 times in my life. Once when I was 16 and got caught spray painting my name under the Route 12 bridge. Once when I reported my dad's death. And once when I had to get fingerprinted for some business license thing. Never thought I'd be here because someone drugged me and tried to frame me for God knows what. Tom leads us to a small interview room. It's got grey walls, a metal table, and 3 chairs. There's a camera in the corner with a blinking red light. Everything about this room is designed to make you feel guilty even if you're not. I'm going to record this, Tom says, settling into his chair across from us. Standard procedure. Miss Chen, let's start with you. Walk me through everything that happened last night from the beginning. Victoria sits up straight, and I watch as she transforms. Gone is the woman who was drinking wine on my porch last night, laughing at my stories about the worst cars I've ever had to fix. This is CEO Victoria, the one who probably sits across from boardrooms full of executives and doesn't blink. Her voice is clear, precise, factual. I arrived at Jake's residence at approximately 8 p.m, she begins. I brought a bottle of wine that I had purchased from Murphy's liquor store earlier that day. The bottle was sealed when I purchased it. I opened it myself at Jake's house. We sat on his front porch and talked. We each had approximately 2 glasses over the course of an hour and a half. Tom is writing everything down in a small notebook. Did you leave the wine unattended at any point? Victoria pauses. I can see her replaying the evening in her head. Yes, she says slowly. I went inside to use the bathroom. I was gone for maybe 5 minutes. The bottle was on the porch table. My skin goes cold. 5 minutes. That's all it would take. Someone could have come up to my porch, dumped something in the bottle, and been gone before Victoria came back. But who? Who would do that? And why? What happened after that? Tom asks. We continued talking and drinking, Victoria says. But about halfway through my 3rd glass, I started feeling wrong. Dizzy, disoriented. My words were slurring. At first I thought maybe I was just more affected by the alcohol than I expected. But then I looked at Jake, and he was clearly in worse shape. He could barely keep his eyes open. That's when I knew something was wrong. What did you do? I helped him inside, Victoria says. He was coherent enough to walk with assistance, but he was fading fast. I got him to his bedroom and made sure he was lying on his side, in case he got sick. Then I went back to the porch to get the wine bottle because I wanted to preserve any evidence. That's when I saw someone. Tom's pen stops moving. You saw someone? A figure, Victoria says. I only caught a glimpse. They were at the edge of Jake's property, near the trees, too far away and too dark for me to see clearly. But they were definitely watching the house. When they saw me looking, they ran. Did you call the police then? Tom asks. No, Victoria admits. I should have, but I was more concerned about Jake. I went back inside, locked all the doors, and stayed awake to make sure he was okay. I started feeling the effects of whatever drug we'd been given around 10 p.m. I tried to fight it, but I lost consciousness around 11. I woke up at 3 a.m, and that's when I searched the house and found the residue in the wine glasses. She pulls the plastic bag from her pocket and slides it across the table. Tom picks it up carefully, examining it. I'll need to get this to the state lab for testing, he says. That'll take a few days at least. In the meantime, Jake, I need to hear your version. I tell him everything I remember, which isn't much. The wine, the conversation, the feeling of the world tilting, and then nothing until this morning. It sounds weak, even to my ears, full of holes and gaps. So you have no memory of how you got from the porch to your bedroom? Tom asks. No, sir, I say quietly. And you can't identify who might have been on your property? No, sir. Tom leans back in his chair and sighs. He looks tired suddenly, older than his 50-some years. Jake, I've known you your whole life. I knew your daddy. I've watched you raise Emma on your own and do a damn good job of it. So I'm going to be straight with you. This doesn't look good. My stomach clenches. Tom, I didn't. I know, he interrupts. I believe you. But believing you and being able to prove what happened are two different things. An anonymous caller reports seeing you bring an impaired woman into your house. You admit you have no memory of several hours last night. Miss, Chen is here in your clothes. Do you see how this looks? That's exactly what someone wanted it to look like, Victoria says sharply. Don't you see? This was a setup. Someone drugged us. Someone watched to make sure we were both incapacitated, and then someone called you to report it. This was planned to destroy both of our reputations. But why? Tom asks the question that's been burning in my brain since Victoria first said the word danger. Why would someone go through all this trouble? What do they gain? Victoria and I look at each other. I can see the answer in her eyes before she says it out loud. I don't know yet, she says, but I'm going to find out. Tom is about to respond when the door to the interview room opens. Deputy Chen sticks his head in, and his face is pale. Sheriff, he says quietly, we've got a problem. Channel 7 just called. Someone leaked the story. They're running it on the noon news. Tech CEO found in compromising situation with local mechanic. Investigation underway. It's going to be everywhere in less than 3 hours. The room goes completely silent. Victoria's face drains of all colour. No, she whispers. No, no, no. My board, my investors. This will destroy everything I've built. I'm thinking about Emma, about her seeing this on the news, about the kids at school, the parents, everyone in Riverside looking at me and wondering if I'm some kind of predator. Who leaked it? Tom demands. Standing up so fast his chair scrapes against the floor. Chen, I want to know who had access to that report. That's the thing, Sheriff, Deputy Chen says, and he looks genuinely confused. Nobody should have had access. I only logged it into the system 45 minutes ago. Whoever leaked this had to have inside information before we even got the anonymous call. The pieces click together in my head, and from the look on Victoria's face, she's reaching the same conclusion. They planned the leak too, I say slowly. This wasn't just about drugging us or making it look bad. They wanted it to go public. They wanted to ruin us both. But who has that kind of reach? Tom asks. Who could coordinate all of this? Victoria stands up abruptly, her chair scraping back. I need to make some calls. Now. Sheriff Daniels, am I free to go? For now, Tom says carefully. But don't leave town. Either of you. This investigation is far from over. We're walking out of the station when Victoria's phone rings. She answers it, and I watch her face go from pale to absolutely ashen. When? She asks sharply. How much? A pause. I'll be on the next flight. Don't do anything until I get there. She hangs up and turns to me, and I've never seen her look scared until this moment. Someone just sold off 40% of my company's stock, she says, her voice barely above a whisper. Enough to tank the value and trigger a hostile takeover clause. Jake, this isn't about us. This was never about us. Someone's trying to steal my entire company, and they needed me discredited to do it. Who? I ask. Even though I'm not sure, I want to know the answer. Her phone buzzes with a text. She looks at it, and her hand starts shaking so badly she almost drops it. Oh my God, she breathes. It's him. It's my business partner. Marcus was supposed to be in Singapore this week. But look, she shows me her phone. It's a photo, clearly taken this morning, of a man in an expensive suit, sitting in what looks like a riverside diner. Murphy's Diner, actually, based on the checkered tablecloth I can see. The text below it reads, "Enjoying small-town life. Hope you are too." He's here, Victoria says. He's been here the whole time. He drugged us. He called the police. He leaked the story. And now he's stealing my company, while I'm stuck 3 states away and looking like I'm having some kind of breakdown. And right then, as if the universe decided this moment wasn't dramatic enough, my phone rings. It's Sarah. Emma's at her house. Why would Sarah be calling unless... Jake? Sarah's voice is panicked, breathless. Jake, Emma's gone. I went to make the girls lunch, and when I came back upstairs they were both crying. Emma said a man came to the window and told her she needed to come with him because you were in trouble. She tried to wake me, but I dozed off on the couch for just a few minutes. And Jake, I'm so sorry, but she climbed out the window and she's gone. The phone falls from my hand and hits the pavement. My daughter is gone, and I know with absolute certainty that Marcus has her. I can't breathe. I literally cannot get air into my lungs. The parking lot is spinning, and Sarah's voice is still coming from my phone on the ground, saying my name over and over. Jake, Jake, are you there? Jake, please say something, but I can't respond because my 7-year-old daughter is gone, and some man who drugged me last night and is trying to steal Victoria's company has taken her. Victoria grabs my shoulders. Her face inches from mine. Jake, look at me. We're going to find her. Do you hear me? We're going to find Emma. He has my daughter. I managed to choke out. He has Emma. He took her. Tom Daniels is already on his radio, calling it in. This is Sheriff Daniels. I need all available units. We have a child abduction. 7-year-old female, Emma Morrison. Last seen at 412 Oak Street, approximately 15 minutes ago. Suspect is a white male, business attire, possibly driving a rental vehicle. I want roadblocks on every route out of town. Now. Victoria picks up my phone from the ground. Sarah, this is Victoria Chen. I need you to tell me exactly what Emma said. Every single word. I can hear Sarah's sobbing voice through the speaker. She said a man told her that her daddy was hurt and she needed to come with him right away. She said he seemed nice, that he knew Jake's name, and he promised he would take her to the hospital to see her dad. The girls thought I was sleeping, so Emma just went. She just went with him. I'm so sorry. I fell asleep. I never fall asleep. I don't know what happened. Sarah. Victoria cuts her off, and her voice is sharp and focused. Did Emma say anything about what the man looked like? What he was wearing? What kind of car? She said he had a fancy suit. Sarah hiccups through her tears. And Riley said she saw a shiny black car at the end of the street. Jake, I'm so sorry. I don't know why I fell asleep. I never. Victoria's eyes meet mine. He drugged her too, she says quietly. The coffee or tea or whatever Sarah drank this morning. He's been planning every single step of this. Tom appears at my elbow. Jake, I need you to focus. Does Emma have a phone? Any way to track her? No, I say. And I want to punch myself because I'd been thinking about getting her a simple phone for emergencies, but I never got around to it. She doesn't have anything. Does she know not to get in cars with strangers? Tom asks. Yes, but if he said I was hurt, if he said I needed her, I trail off because I know my daughter. I know that Emma would do anything if she thought I was in danger. She's the kind of kid who brings home injured birds and feeds stray cats and cries at movies when the dog dies. If someone told her I was hurt, she would go with them in a heartbeat. My fault. This is my fault. I sent her to Sarah's. I put her in a position where this could happen. His name is Marcus Chen, Victoria is telling Tom, and she's pulling up a photo on her phone. Marcus Chen. He's my business partner, or he was. Here, this is him. The photo shows an Asian man in his early 40s, slicked back hair, expensive suit, the kind of smile that probably looks charming in boardrooms, but makes my skin crawl right now. This is the man who has my daughter. Why would he take Emma, I ask, and my voice sounds hollow, even to me. What does she have to do with any of this? Leverage, Victoria says, and there's ice in her voice now. He needs me to back down, to sign over my shares, to let him have the company. And he knows the only way I'll do that is if Emma's safety is at stake. He's using her to control us both. My phone buzzes in Victoria's hand. A text from an unknown number. Don't open it, Tom starts to say, but Victoria's already reading it. Her face goes white. She shows me the screen. The text says, "Pretty little girl you've got there, Morrison. Would be a shame if anything happened to her before her 8th birthday. Miss Chen knows what I want. She has 2 hours to transfer her shares to the account I'm sending. If she doesn't, well, let's just say Emma might not make it to 3rd grade. Don't involve the police. I'm watching everything." Below the text is a photo. Emma, my Emma, sitting in the back of a car, her eyes wide and scared, clutching her stuffed rabbit. She's not hurt, at least not that I can see, but the terror on her face makes something inside me break into 1,000 pieces. I make a sound I don't even recognize. It's somewhere between a sob and a growl and pure animal rage. "I'm going to kill him," I hear myself say. "I'm going to find him, and I'm going to kill him." "Jake, no," Tom says firmly, grabbing my arm. "You need to let us handle this. We'll find her." "How?" I shout. And I don't care that we're in a parking lot, that people are staring. "How are you going to find her, Tom? He's been 10 steps ahead of us this entire time. He drugged us, he framed us, he leaked it to the news, and now he has my daughter, and you're telling me to wait? I'm telling you not to do something that'll make this worse," Tom says. But even he sounds uncertain now. Victoria's phone rings. She looks at the screen and her jaw tightens. "It's him," she says. "It's Marcus." "Don't answer it," Tom orders. "We need to trace." But Victoria's already swiping to accept the call and putting it on speaker. "Hello, Victoria," a smooth male voice says. "I hope you got my message." "Where is she?" Victoria demands, and the raw fury in her voice makes even me step back. "Where's Emma, Marcus?" "She's safe, for now. Cute kid, by the way. She's been telling me all about her dad. Sounds like quite the hero. Too bad he couldn't protect her from getting into a car with a stranger." There's cruel amusement in his voice that makes me want to reach through the phone and strangle him. "If you hurt her," I start, but Marcus laughs. "You'll what, Morrison? Come after me? Please. You're a mechanic in a nowhere town. You can't even remember what happened last night. You're pathetic. But you know what? I actually like you. You're simple, honest, so different from the sharks Victoria usually surrounds herself with. That's probably why she slummed it with you for 3 weeks, right, Victoria? A little vacation from the real world? What do you want, Marcus?" Victoria asks, ignoring his jab. "I told you what I want. Transfer 60% of your shares to the holding company I'm about to send you information for. Do it in the next 90 minutes, and Emma goes home, safe and sound. You can even keep playing house with the biker mechanic if you want. I don't care. All I want is what should have been mine from the beginning. My company was never yours, Victoria says coldly. You were a junior partner who got lucky when I needed capital expansion. That doesn't give you the right to. It gives me every right. Marcus's voice explodes through the speaker, all pretense of charm gone. I put in 12 years, Victoria. 12 years of building your company while you got all the credit. I made you who you are, and you were going to push me out. Don't think I didn't see the paperwork your lawyers were drawing up. You were going to buy me out and leave me with pennies. Because you've been embezzling for the last 3 years. Victoria shoots back. Did you think I wouldn't find out? That I wouldn't notice the offshore accounts, the fake vendors, the missing inventory? I was giving you a chance to leave quietly instead of pressing charges. Oh, this just got so much more complicated. Tom is making frantic hand signals, trying to get Victoria to keep Marcus talking, to keep him on the line so they can trace the call. You can't prove any of that, Marcus says, but his voice is tight now, and it doesn't matter, because in 90 minutes, either you sign over the company or Emma Morrison becomes a tragic statistic, another missing child who wandered off and was never seen again. Your choice, Victoria. What matters more, a business or a little girl's life? You wouldn't, Victoria breathes. Marcus, you're not a killer. You're a thief and a liar. But you're not. Try me, Marcus interrupts. I've got nothing to lose now. Either I walk away with Chen Industries, or I walk away with nothing. And if it's nothing, I'm taking everyone down with me. You, Morrison, the kid, all of it. The call ends. Victoria stares at her phone, her hands shaking. He's serious, she whispers. Oh God, he's actually serious. He's going to kill her. No, I say firmly. And something shifts inside me. The panic is still there. The terror is still there. But underneath it is something else. Something cold and focused. No, he's not. Because we're going to find her first. Jake, we have less than 90 minutes, Victoria says. Even if I transfer the shares, there's no guarantee he'll let her go. Men like Marcus, once they cross this line, they don't come back from it. Then we don't give him the chance, I say. I turn to Tom. I know this town. I know every road, every building, every place someone could hide. Marcus is from the city. He doesn't know Riverside like we do. He's going to make mistakes. Jake's right, Tom says slowly, and I can see him shifting into that focused lawman mode. Chen, where would Marcus go? Think about what you know about him. His patterns, his preferences. Where would he feel safe? Victoria closes her eyes, thinking, he likes to be comfortable. Expensive. He wouldn't hide somewhere run down or dirty, and he'd want privacy, but also an escape route. He's paranoid about being trapped. The Riverside Inn, I say suddenly. It's the nicest place in town. Mrs. Patterson would have rented him a room, and it's right on Route 12. Easy access to the highway if he needs to run. He was at Murphy's Diner this morning, Victoria adds. That's 3 blocks from the inn. He's staying close to his base. Tom is already on his radio again. Chen, Martinez, I need you at the Riverside Inn, now. Do not approach the building. Eyes only. We're looking for a black rental vehicle and a male suspect with a child. We pile into Tom's cruiser. He's driving. I'm in the passenger seat. Victoria's in the back. We're racing through town, and my mind is going 100 miles an hour. He won't hurt her yet, Victoria says from the back seat, and I think she's trying to convince herself as much as me. He needs her as leverage, As long as I haven't transferred the shares, Emma is valuable to him. What happens when you do transfer them? I ask. What happens when he has what he wants? Silence, because we all know the answer. Once Marcus has the company, Emma becomes a witness, a liability. My phone buzzes again. Another text from the unknown number. This time, it's a video. I don't want to watch it. Every instinct in my body is screaming not to watch it. But I have to. I have to see that my daughter is okay. I press play. Emma is in what looks like a motel room. Cheap wallpaper, scratchy-looking bedspread. She's sitting on the bed, and there are tears streaming down her face. But she's trying so hard to be brave. God, she's trying so hard. "Hi, Daddy," she says to the camera, and her voice is small and shaky. "The man said I have to tell you that I'm okay. I'm not hurt. But Daddy, I'm really scared. I want to come home. I want you to come get me." The camera shifts, and I can see Marcus's hand reaching into frame to wipe away Emma's tears. It's such a mockery of comfort that I want to put my fist through the windshield. "She's a brave girl," Marcus's voice says from behind the camera. "Takes after her dad, I bet. Too bad bravery doesn't pay the bills. Right, sweetheart? Maybe your dad should have thought about that before getting involved with people way out of his league." The video cuts off. I'm gripping my phone so hard the screen is cracking under my fingers. "He's at a motel," I say. "Not the inn. Somewhere cheaper. Somewhere nobody would think to look because it doesn't match his profile." "The Motor Lodge," Tom says immediately. "Out on Route 7. It's a dump, barely used except for truckers passing through. If he wanted to stay under the radar, we change direction, tires squealing. My heart is pounding so hard I can feel it in my skull." Victoria leans forward between the seats. "Jake, I need you to listen to me. When we find him, and we will find him, you need to let Tom handle it. You need to stay calm." "Stay calm?" I turn to look at her. "He has my daughter. He drugged us. He's trying to ruin both our lives and steal your company. And you want me to stay calm?" "I want you to be smart," Victoria says, and she grabs my face between her hands, forcing me to look at her. "Emma needs you thinking clearly, not running in there like some action hero and getting hurt or getting her hurt. We do this right. We do this careful, okay? I want to argue. I want to tell her that she doesn't understand, that she's not a parent, that she can't possibly know what this feels like. But when I look in her eyes, I see that she does understand. Maybe not the parent part, but the fear, the desperation, the need to protect someone you care about. She's feeling it too." "Okay," I say quietly. "Okay." The Motor Lodge comes into view. It's exactly as run down as I remember. 6 rooms in a single-story strip, peeling paint, a neon sign that's missing half its letters. There's only one car in the parking lot, a shiny black Mercedes, Victoria's Mercedes, the one I fixed 2 weeks ago. "He's using my car," Victoria breathes. "That son of a bitch stole my car." Tom pulls over about 100 yards away, out of sight. Deputy Chen and Deputy Martinez pull up behind us in a second cruiser. "Here's how this is going to work," Tom says. "All business now. Chen, Martinez, you two cover the back exits. Don't let him leave that building. Morrison, Victoria, you stay in the car." "Like hell," I say. "Jake, this is not negotiable. That's my daughter in there," I say, and my voice breaks. "I'm not sitting in a car while you go in. I can't. Tom, please. I'll do whatever you say. I'll stay behind you, but I have to be there. I have to be there when we get her out." Tom looks at me for a long moment. Finally, he nods. "Behind me. You don't move unless I tell you to move. Understood?" "Understood. I'm coming too." Victoria says. Absolutely not. He's my business partner, Victoria interrupts. I know how he thinks. I might be able to talk him down. And Jake's right. We can't just sit here. Tom looks like he wants to argue, but we're wasting time. Fine. Both of you, behind me. And if either of you do anything stupid, I will arrest you myself. We approach the motel quietly. Tom has his gun drawn. I've never seen him pull his weapon before, not in all the years I've known him. And the sight of it makes this whole nightmare feel horrifyingly real. We can hear voices from room 4. Marcus's voice, calm and measured, and then Emma's small voice responding. I can't make out the words, but just hearing her voice makes my knees almost buckle with relief. She's alive. She's talking. She's okay. Tom positions himself next to the door. He holds up 3 fingers, 2, 1. He kicks the door open. Sheriff's department, hands where I can see them. Everything happens in slow motion and too fast all at once. Marcus is standing in the middle of the room. Emma is on the bed. And Marcus has a gun. A gun. He grabs Emma, pulling her in front of him like a shield, and presses the gun to her head. Stay back, Marcus shouts. I swear to God, I will shoot her. Stay back. Emma screams. My daughter screams, and it's the worst sound I've ever heard in my entire life. Marcus, don't. Victoria pushes past Tom, her hands up. Don't do this. She's just a child. I know what she is, Marcus yells, and I can see now that he's unraveling. His perfect hair is messy, his suit is wrinkled, and there's a wild look in his eyes that wasn't there before. This isn't the calculated businessman from the phone call. This is someone who's cornered and desperate. She's my ticket out of here. You think I'm stupid? You think I didn't know you'd find me? I wanted you to find me. Then what's your play, Marcus? Victoria asks, and her voice is remarkably steady. What happens now? Now, you're going to transfer those shares, Marcus says. Right now, on your phone, or I paint this wall with her brain. Daddy, Emma whimpers, and tears are streaming down her face. Daddy, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I went with him. I thought you were hurt. I'm sorry. It's okay, baby, I managed to say, even though my entire world is collapsing. It's not your fault. None of this is your fault. Transfer the shares, Victoria, Marcus demands. Now. Victoria pulls out her phone with shaking hands. Okay, she says. Okay, I'm doing it. Just please don't hurt her. Please. Victoria, no, I say. Your company is worth nothing compared to her life. Victoria snaps, and there are tears on her face now. It's just a company, Jake. It's just money and power, and none of it matters. Not compared to Emma. She's tapping on her phone, entering passwords, and I can see the internal struggle on her face. This company was her parents' legacy. This company was everything she'd worked for, and she's giving it all away for my daughter. For Emma, it's done, Victoria says quietly. Check your account. It's all there. 60% of Chen Industries is yours. Now let her go. Marcus fumbles for his own phone, keeping the gun against Emma's head with one hand. He checks something on the screen, and a slow smile spreads across his face. Well, what do you know? He says. You actually did it. You actually gave me everything. I kept my end, Victoria says. Now keep yours. Let Emma go. Here's the thing, Victoria, Marcus says, and that smile gets wider, crueler. I lied. Everything happens at once. Tom raises his gun. Marcus's finger tightens on the trigger. Victoria screams, no. And I do the only thing I can think of. I don't think. I just move. I throw myself forward, knocking into Emma, pushing her out of the way. The gun goes off. The sound is deafening in the small room. I feel something hot tear through my shoulder, spinning me around, and I hit the floor hard. More gunshots, Tom firing, Emma screaming, Victoria shouting my name, and then everything goes quiet, except for the ringing in my ears. I'm lying on the floor of the motel room, and I can see Emma crawling toward me, her face covered in tears, but she's moving. She's okay, and that's all that matters. Daddy, she's sobbing. Daddy, no, no, no. I'm okay, baby, I tell her, even though I'm pretty sure I'm not. There's blood, a lot of blood, and the room is starting to spin. I'm okay. Tom is kneeling over Marcus, who's on the ground, not moving. Victoria is suddenly there, pressing something against my shoulder, her face pale. You're going to be fine, she's saying, over and over like a prayer. You're going to be fine, Jake. Stay with me. Stay with me. Emma curls into my side, careful of my shoulder, and I wrap my good arm around her. She's shaking. We're both shaking. But she's here. She's safe. That's all that matters. I love you, baby girl, I whisper into her hair. I love you so much. I love you too. Daddy, she hiccups. Please don't leave me. Please don't leave me like Grandpa did. I'm not going anywhere. I promise. Even though the edges of my vision are going dark, I'm right here. The last thing I see before I pass out is Victoria's face above mine, her tears falling on my cheeks, and Emma holding my hand so tight, like if she just doesn't let go, everything will be okay. And you know what? Maybe it will be. I wake up in a hospital bed. The first thing I see is Emma, curled up in a chair next to me, fast asleep. Sarah is there too, sitting on the other side of Emma, keeping watch. And standing by the window, silhouetted against the late afternoon sun, is Victoria. Hey, I croak out, and my throat feels like sandpaper. Victoria spins around, and the relief on her face is so intense it almost hurts to look at. You're awake, she breathes, rushing to my bedside. Oh, thank God you're awake. How long was I out? I ask. 18 hours, she says. You lost a lot of blood. The bullet went through your shoulder, but missed all the important stuff. The doctors say you'll make a full recovery, but you need to take it easy for a while. Emma is fine, Victoria says quickly. Physically, she's completely fine. A little shaken up, obviously. She hasn't left your side, except when the nurses forced her to eat something. Jake, she was so scared. We all were. I look at my daughter, sleeping peacefully for the first time in probably 2 days. And Marcus? Victoria's face hardens. Dead. Tom's shot killed him instantly. It's been ruled a justified shooting, self-defense and defense of others. Tom's on administrative leave, pending the full investigation, but no one doubts it was the right call. Your company? I ask, even though I already know the answer broke her heart. But Victoria surprises me. She actually smiles. Still mine. I blink. What? But you transferred. I transferred the shares to a holding company that Marcus set up, Victoria says. But what Marcus didn't know is that I have a clause in every single share agreement that allows me to reverse any transfer made under duress within 72 hours. It's a safety measure my lawyer insisted on years ago after a hostile takeover attempt. So as soon as I was able to file the paperwork, all those shares came right back to me. Marcus died thinking he'd won, but he lost everything. I don't even know what to say. That's incredible. It's paranoid corporate policy, Victoria says with a small laugh, but for once, I'm grateful for it. Her smile fades. Jake, what you did, throwing yourself in front of Emma like that, you could have died. Yeah, I say simply, but I didn't. And she's safe. That's all that matters. Victoria takes my hand. the one that's not hooked up to an IV. You saved her life, she says quietly, and you saved mine too, in a way. If something had happened to Emma because of my business, because of my mess, I don't think I could have lived with that. It wasn't your mess, I tell her. You didn't do this. Marcus did. You were as much a victim as any of us. Maybe, she says. But I brought that world into your life. I brought danger to you and Emma. I'm so sorry, Jake. Don't be, I say, squeezing her hand. These last 3 weeks, having you here, getting to know you. Victoria, you made me remember that there's more to life than just routine and survival. You reminded me that I'm allowed to want things for myself, not just for Emma. You reminded me what it feels like to actually live. Victoria's eyes are shining with tears. You did the same for me, she whispers. I spent so long focused on work, on building this empire, that I forgot why I was building it in the first place. My parents started that company because they wanted to create something meaningful, something that would help people. Somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that, but watching you with Emma, seeing how you live your life with such integrity and love, even without the money or the power or the prestige, you showed me what actually matters. So, what happens now? I ask, because I need to know. You go back to Seattle and run your empire, and I stay here and fix cars? Victoria is quiet for a long moment. When she speaks, her voice is careful. I need to go back to Seattle, she says, at least for a while. There's damage control to do, board meetings to attend, and I need to completely restructure the company's leadership now that Marcus is gone. But Jake, I don't want this to be goodbye. My heart jumps. What are you saying? I'm saying that Chen Industries has been looking to expand our manufacturing operations, Victoria says, and there's a spark in her eyes now. And I happen to know this little town in Montana with great real estate prices and a skilled workforce. What if I moved some of our production here, created jobs, invested in the community? You'd do that, I ask? You'd move part of your company here? I'd do more than that, Victoria says. If you want me to, I could split my time between Seattle and Riverside. I could be here more often. We could actually see where this goes, you and me. If you want that, do I want that? A woman who challenged me, inspired me, made me laugh, and gave up her entire company to save my daughter? A woman who looks at me like I'm worth something, even when I'm covered in grease or blood or both? Yeah, I say, and I'm smiling now, even though it makes my shoulder hurt. Yeah, I want that. Victoria leans down and kisses me, soft and gentle, and it feels like a promise, like a beginning instead of an ending. When she pulls back, Emma is awake and watching us with wide eyes. Does this mean Miss Victoria is going to be my mum? Emma asks, completely serious. Victoria and I both freeze. We haven't talked about any of that, haven't even defined what we are, and Emma's already jumping to. Because that would be pretty cool, Emma continues. Riley has a mum and I don't, so if you're going to be here a lot, maybe you could be like my mum if you want to. I mean, you don't have to, but I think you're really nice, and you make my dad smile, and you smell like flowers. Victoria's eyes are full of tears again, happy ones this time. She looks at me, asking permission with her eyes, and I nod. Emma, Victoria says, kneeling down so she's at Emma's level. I would be honored to be part of your family. We'll take it slow, okay? We'll figure it out together. But yes, I very much want to be here for you and your dad. Emma throws her arms around Victoria's neck, and Victoria hugs her back, and Sarah is wiping her eyes. And I'm lying here in this hospital bed, thinking about how 48 hours ago my life was simple and boring and safe, And now it's complicated and messy and absolutely terrifying. But also, it's full of possibility. 2 months later, I'm standing in front of a crowd of about 200 people in the old Riverside High School gym. Victoria is next to me, and Mayor Thompson is at the podium announcing the opening of Chen Industries' newest manufacturing facility right here in Riverside. 100 new jobs, economic growth, a future for this town beyond just getting by. Emma is in the front row with Sarah and Riley, waving at me like I'm some kind of celebrity. Victoria squeezes my hand. "You ready for this?" she whispers. "Your life is about to get a lot more complicated." "It already is complicated," I whisper back. "But you know what? I think I like complicated." The crowd applauds as Mayor Thompson announces that I'll be the operations manager for the new facility. Me, Jake Morrison, the mechanic who barely graduated high school, is going to be managing a high-tech manufacturing plant. Victoria believed I could do it. She saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And maybe that's what love is, really. Seeing the potential in someone and helping them become the person they're meant to be. That night, after all the speeches and the ribbon cutting and the reporters, Victoria and Emma and I are sitting on my front porch. The same porch where this whole crazy story started. Emma is between us, eating ice cream with extra sprinkles like I promised. And Victoria's head is on my shoulder. "Hey Dad," Emma asks, "can I ask you something?" "Anything, baby girl." "Do you think Grandpa would be proud of us? Of what we're doing?" I look at my daughter, this brave, incredible little human who survived being kidnapped and still managed to keep her huge heart intact. I look at Victoria, who gave up everything to save Emma and then found a way to build something even better. I look at this town, this community that's getting a second chance because one woman decided that profit wasn't the only thing that mattered. "Yeah," I say, and I mean it with everything I have. "Yeah, I think he'd be really proud." Emma smiles and goes back to her ice cream. Victoria kisses my cheek, and for the first time in a very long time, I'm not just surviving, I'm actually living. And if you've stuck with this story all the way to the end, I want you to know something. Life is going to throw impossible situations at you. There will be moments when you can't breathe, when you don't know what to do, when everything feels like it's falling apart. But here's what I learned. You're stronger than you think. You're braver than you believe. And the people who really love you will show up when it matters most. So take the risk. Open your heart. Choose love over fear. Because the best things in life, the things that really matter, they're always on the other side of scary. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. And remember that every ending is just a new beginning. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button and leave a comment telling me what moment got you the most. And subscribe because I've got more stories about real people facing impossible choices and finding the courage to keep going. You never know when you might need to hear that you're not alone,